Honestly, I don't know where else to run. I've been locked in my room for about 3 days now. I think I have to kill her, or kill me, or kill... I don't even know how to phrase it. All I know is that I'm not the only one of me. There's another one out there. I'm just not sure if I'm the real me or she is. I tried talking to my mom about it, and she just said that I need to go to the hospital and get help. Screw that. They don't know how to help me. I don't think I have a clone and she must be dealt with is in the MSD5, so I'll handle this myself. I may be the clone, but I plan to be the one who survives this. I can feel it in my bones that she's planning the same. Before I get to my plan, let me give you all some backstory. This all started a little over a week ago, when my car battery died. I got a jump from the neighbor and headed to the auto parts store down the road. I pulled in the parking lot and made my way inside. I think I felt her before I saw her. I could feel something was off as soon as I walked inside. I didn't know what the feeling was, but I choked it up to the stress and honestly just being tired. I spoke with the man at the counter and got myself a new battery. He told me he needed to handle a few other customers first, and he or a coworker would be out soon to change the battery. I went back out to my car, thankful it was still running due to how cold it was. Sitting in that driver's seat was the last moment I felt normal. I wish I knew that would be the last time. I looked up and saw the door open. Before I could take a breath, I shifted into drive. I floored it. I still don't remember hitting the gas. It was me carrying that battery out. I'm sure of it. I've looked myself in the mirror enough to know what I look like. While I don't remember hitting the gas, I wish I would have just ran myself over and saved myself a lot of time. Luckily for me, and unluckily for me, I jumped out of the way. Before I rammed through the front windows, I was able to slam on the brakes and fled the parking lot as soon as I could. Surprisingly, no one has come and found me over my attempted murder. And make no mistake, I fully intend to get rid of that girl. 2 days ago, I went back. Luckily, she wasn't there. I made an excuse to go into the back for the bathroom and was able to find the schedule. Snapped a picture, did my business, and left. My name was on the schedule. Scheduled to work the next 5 days. This means I have some time to plan. My mind has been set since I first saw her. I must die in order to fully live. I guess you all deserve to know why I think I'm the clone. Honestly, I don't know if I am or if I am. I don't have any real memories. Not any real long-term ones, at least. I honestly don't even know if the woman I talked to was my real mom. I don't remember ever actually seeing her. I don't know if I have any siblings. I don't know where I was born. It's like I was just planted here with a work-from-home job in some crummy apartment. I bet that girl has such a great, loving family. And I can't wait till I have what I've stolen from me. Like I said before, I have no real proof I'm a clone. I don't remember waking up in a lab or anything. I figure if someone out there can secretly clone people and plant them with full lives, they can alter some pesky memories, too. And hey, maybe I was crafted right here in this building. Regardless of how I came to be, I'm here now. And I plan on keeping it that way. That's why I have to get ahead of me and get rid of me first. I've got a plan, and it's going to work. I'm going to walk into that store and shoot her right in the face. Best part is, you can't get in trouble for killing a clone. So I should be able to walk right out and take the life that's rightfully mine. I'm making my move tomorrow. Maybe the cops will finally find me and stop me. Or maybe I'll pull this off. Either way, I'm ending this. I have to. I've not been able to sleep, eat, or think since I saw me. This has to come to an end, one way or another. The least you all could do is wish one of me luck. I'll update you all as soon as I can. When I first walked into Dr. Thorne's office, I didn't realize I'd stepped into an elegantly laid trap, baited with the scent of pine and an air of tranquility. The office was a meticulously curated world of order and calm, each piece of furniture precisely placed, a stark contrast to the chaos I felt inside. Dr. Thorne, with his sharp features and immaculate suit, was the perfect embodiment of controlled professionalism. His initial smile was reassuring, yet something in his eyes hinted at a detached coldness. As we embark on this journey together, Dr. Thorne began, settling across from me with his clipboard ready, it's essential to confront the most insidious enemy that resides within us. I often refer to this as the wolf in sheep's clothing, the internal voice that disguises itself as protective but in reality sabotages our progress with fear and doubt. Over the weeks, these sessions seemed to peel back the layers of my psyche, each meeting ostensibly aimed at helping me silence the metaphorical wolf. Yet, with Dr. Thorne's guidance, the discussions often led me feeling more exposed, more vulnerable than before. He had a way of turning my fears against me, dissecting my failures with a precision that felt more invasive than insightful. You must realize that your loyalty to your past, your friends, your sentimental values, these are the wolf's disciples holding you back, he would say, his voice calm but piercing. They mask themselves as comfort, but they gnaw at your potential. We need to rid you of these deceitful protectors. His tactics were subtle at first. He used classic methods of dark psychology, like gaslighting, where he'd subtly twist my words or recollections to make me doubt my memory. Are you sure that's what's happened? Are you sure that's what happened? It seems like your mind is playing tricks on you again, he'd suggest, a slight frown creasing his brow, planting seeds of doubt. As I grew more dependent on his sessions, the wolf chatter, as he called it, seemed to amplify whenever I was away from his office. This anxiety you're feeling is just wolf chatter, trying to lure you back to your old, unproductive ways, he'd explain, prescribing more frequent visits as a remedy. His voice became a constant echo in my mind, reshaping my thoughts, isolating me from those I loved under the guise of clearing away the negative influences. Each session, he'd push a little further, employing isolation tactics by encouraging me to distance myself from friends and family, claiming they were part of a pack of wolves that clouded my judgment. To truly evolve, you must walk this path alone, he'd insist, his stare unnerving in its intensity. Financial manipulation gradually wove its way into our therapy, as he suggested that my reluctance to invest in more sessions was a sign of my commitment to mediocrity. Overcoming the wolf is a resource-intensive battle. You're either all in, or you're allowing it to win, he'd state, guiding my hand as I wrote checks that strained my savings to their limits. It was not until a stark notice of foreclosure arrived that the full scale of his manipulation dawned on me. Enraged and betrayed, I confronted him, my voice shaky with the weight of my realization. "You've been using me," I accused, standing in his office, the walls now seeming to close in around me. "You're not a healer, you're a predator." Thorne's reaction was chilling, his usual calm demeanor cracking to reveal the monster beneath. "I'm merely accelerating your evolution. The discomfort you feel is the dying whine of your inner wolf," he replied, his smile cold and unyielding. Armed with secret recordings and accounts from others he had wronged, I finally saw the pattern. "I know about the others," I said during our final confrontation, my newfound resolve stiffening my spine. "It ends now, Dr. Thorne." In that moment, the controlled, meticulous psychologist unraveled completely. His expression contorted into something monstrous as he lunged across the room, intent on silencing me. I evaded him, heart pounding, witnessing the physical collapse of his calculated persona. The police arrested him, but the deepest cuts were those left unseen. When I returned to retrieve my belongings from his office, a whisper of his voice seemed to linger in the air, a chilling echo of the wolf chatter he had instilled in me. As I turned to leave, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. Thorne. Or perhaps the manifestation of my deepest fears, smirking from the corner. Panic gripped me as I fled, Thorne's laughter chasing me into the night. Looking back, his silhouette was visible in the window of the office, a dark reminder that sometimes the wolf isn't just in our minds. Sometimes, it's the very person we trust to help us hunt it down. As the office light flickered out, the last words he had spoken to me echoed chillingly clear. "You can never arrest a shadow." With every step I took away from that place, I knew the journey to silence the wolf chatter he had amplified would be one I'd walk with vigilance. The real wolves, I realized, don't always hide. Sometimes, they sit right across from us, week after week, day after day, grinning as they devour our lives. It started when I was on a road trip, stopping at the dingy roadside motel off the highway. The sign buzzed weakly in the night, and the old man at the front desk barely looked up when I checked in. "Room 6, he muttered, sliding a key across the counter. I didn't even have to sign anything. The room smelled like mildew and cheap cleaner. It wasn't good, but I wasn't in a good place. My husband, soon-to-be ex, and I had gotten into another fight. He shouted. I shouted. The dog barked. I left. And then I was there, at Palm Island Motel, just 3 miles south of the Georgia border. My mood was so far south, there wasn't any map left for it to travel down. The flickering bathroom light annoyed me. Big surprise. Everything was annoying to me. I decided to turn it off and wash my face in the dim glow of the nightstand lamp. I turned the faucet and fell. Not onto the grimy motel tiles. Not onto anything solid. Just down. I woke up on my back, staring at the ceiling lined with flickering fluorescence. The air was thick with chlorine. When I sat up, I realized I was lying on smooth, damp tile, inches away from a shallow, still pool. It stretched out infinitely. The water was the most picturesque shade of blue, cartoon blue. The air was humid, pressing against my skin, and as I sat up, I realized that stark white walls surrounded me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing into nothing. What just happened? There was no answer. No doors, no windows, no signs of life. I started walking. The walls formed a maze around me, leading to more pools, more tiled corridors, more silence. I've never been more afraid in my life. I don't know how long I wandered before I saw the first sign that I wasn't alone. A ripple. The water in one of the distant pools shuddered, just for a moment, before going perfectly still again. My pulse pounded as I scanned the empty halls. Nothing. Just the endless pools, the buzzing lights. And then I saw them. Wet footprints. Not mine. It felt like the sort of place where unfriendly people would congregate. Unfriendly things. I should have. Hindsight, right? It's always 20/20. That night, if it was night, something whispered my name. Maria. I sat upright. My eyes scanned the small room I had taken shelter in. White tiles, blue water, bright lights. No one else was there. This isn't funny, my voice shook. I pulled my knees closer to my chest and tried to ignore the grumbling in my stomach. Ron? I don't know why I called out for my almost ex. I didn't really think he was down here. Wherever here happened to be. I just didn't know who else to, I guess. Silence greeted me. I didn't sleep that night. It was the start of a habit. I don't sleep much here. I try really hard not to, mostly because someone always calls my name right when I go to sleep. It feels dangerous. But exhaustion gets the best of everyone, and several days, though they felt like years, into being here. I must have drifted off because I woke up to a splash. A deep one. Close. My stomach twisted as I sat up. The pool beside me had ripples spreading outward. Something had been there. Maybe still was. Then I heard the breathing. Slow. Wet. Just beyond the next hallway. I pressed myself against the tile, barely daring to breathe. A shape moved. A figure, tall, lanky, dripping with water, stood at the edge of a pool just beyond my sight. It didn't move like a person. It swayed, almost floating above the tile, as if deciding whether or not to step into the water. The skin looked almost like wet wax in the bright neon white. the limbs elongated and seemingly jointless. And then it bent at an unnatural angle and disappeared beneath the surface, without a splash. I didn't wait around to see if it would come back. That was days ago, I think. I've been moving constantly, keeping my back to the walls, avoiding the water. That's hard. There's not a lot out here other than water. But today, I found something new. A metal door, rusted and slick with condensation, stands at the end of a narrow hallway. It's the first thing that doesn't belong here. The only way out. It has to be. I know that it has to be. But I hesitated. There are wet footprints leading up to it. None coming back. I don't know if I should go in there or stay here and keep hoping that creature doesn't come back. If anyone finds this, remember me. And don't trust the water. As I stood in the almost empty classroom with only 2 other students, I realized that signing up randomly for whichever course was available might not have been my best choice. But, well, I didn't have much of a choice anyway. I scoffed at myself. 6 months. Just 6 months of this, and I could switch to something else. My mood lightened at the thought of the pizza waiting for me that night. As I stood there, the door opened, and a man walked in. He was well-dressed, with long curls cascading to his shoulders and a face so striking it was almost otherworldly. I hadn't seen anyone so beautiful in years. The sight of him stunned me. Without saying a word, he picked up a broken piece of chalk and wrote on the board, "Nice to meet you all. I'm Ron, your sculpting teacher." I blinked, startled. Teacher? For a moment, I thought he was a model or an artist on display himself. The other 2 students seemed unimpressed, sighing heavily, clearly disinterested. After the brief introduction, the class started. But it wasn't what I expected. Instead of working on anything hands-on, Ron played a video about the basics of sculpting and remained silent the entire time. And I spent more time looking at him than at the video. After the class, I learned the other 2 students were dropping out. I considered doing the same, but something about the quiet intrigue of the class and Ron made me decide to stay. Part of me felt bad for him too. If no one else stayed, would he lose his job? The next day, I was the only one in the classroom. It felt oddly intimate, the silence heavier than before. Ron walked up to me and handed me a piece of paper. "Are you sure you want to continue this class?" I smirked, thinking it was a test. But then I realized he couldn't speak. The knowledge hit me harder than it should have, and I immediately felt guilty for smirking. I nodded and said yes, half out of genuine interest, half out of pity. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment before he walked to the front and began the lesson. For weeks, it was just the 2 of us. He communicated only through notes, his instructions simple yet cryptic. My sculptures turned out strange, abstract forms that seemed to emerge from a place I didn't fully understand. They were detailed, almost grotesquely so, with expressions that felt too real. I didn't question it at first. Art is meant to evoke emotion, after all. One night after class, something changed. I lingered, examining the pieces I'd worked on. They felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. The lights flickered, and the room seemed to shift. Shadows danced unnaturally on the walls, and I swore I heard whispers. And then, on the chalkboard, a message appeared, scratched in jagged letters. Sculpt me. I stumbled back, my tools clattering to the floor. The sculptures around me seemed to move, just slightly, but enough to make my blood run cold. I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, until the lights snapped off completely. In the darkness, I felt them. Cold, stone-like hands brushing against me. The sound of grinding stone filled the air, and then a voice. Ron's voice, whispered directly into my mind. Create me. The lights flickered back on, and everything was normal again. The sculptures were in their original places, and Ron walked in, his usual silent demeanor intact. He handed me another note. Are you all right? You look pale. We'll end class early today. You don't seem well. I nodded, too shaken to argue. Outside the classroom, I noticed a poster on the notice board. It bore Ron's name and advertised an upcoming sculpting expedition. Was it the same Ron? The description was vague, but it seemed likely. The next day I went to the exhibition, curious. The gallery was packed, the crowd buzzing with admiration for the sculptures on display. Each piece was hauntingly lifelike. A man mid-scream, a child crouched in fear, a woman crying bloody tears. The detail was astonishing, almost unsettling. And then I saw him. Ron. He was nothing like the reserved, quiet figure from class. Here, he was a star, surrounded by admirers, exuding charisma. I was shocked. He never once mentioned being so famous. One piece in particular caught my eye. A sculpture of a woman crying bloody tears. The sorrow and fear etched into her face were so vivid I felt compelled to touch it. My fingers brushed against its surface. It was warm. Before I could react, the figure crumbled under my touch. It wasn't stone. Flesh and blood spilled onto the floor, and the smell of decay filled the air. I stumbled back, horror clawing at my throat. And then everything went black. I woke up to darkness, my body stiff and cold. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My limbs refused to obey me. My chest burned and panic set in. I could see faintly the stage of the gallery, the dim lights casting shadows over a new centerpiece. It took me a moment to realize the centerpiece was me. I was frozen in place, my body contorted into a macabre pose. My hands reached out as if pleading, my face twisted in terror. The spectators marveled at my realism, their voices muffled in my ears. Truly a haunting, someone said. A tragic masterpiece, another murmured. I wanted to scream, to beg for help, but I couldn't. Ron appeared beside me, smiling faintly. He leaned in close, his voice soft and cold. Welcome to eternity. I live in a very old house. I'm talking old. It used to be split into two during the mid-1800s, and there was a railroad hub in my front yard. With history like that, deaths were bound to occur, and if what others thought were true, so are ghosts. Now, I'm not a particularly believing person when it comes to the paranormal. Usually, I can figure out a reason for any so-called unexplainable thing that were to happen. But this one, I can't put my finger on it. My basement is unfinished. The walls are rocking and crumbling at the cement in between the cracks. The floor is practically made of mud, and the ceiling is only about 5 feet in height. It's freezing down there, and God forbid you don't wear shoes. You'll come up with black soles and probably a few slices on your heels. As terrible as it sounds, those aren't the issues at hand. Every single time I go down there, without fail, the door is open. There are 2 ways into my basement. The inside door, which is always locked, and the outside doors, which are 2 enormous, clunky metal ones, stuck together by the multi-decade-old dark green paint they're sloppily plastered over with. After going through the Bilco doors, there are a few steps, and an old wooden one. If you can somehow manage to open the metal doors, the wooden one is locked from the inside with a slide latch. Locking this latch is no easy feat, mind you. It, similar to the doors, is plastered in grainy white paint older than me. Nobody goes down into the basement. It's cold, uncomfortable, and there really isn't anything important down there. But somehow, the door is just always open. I make jokes about it to my family, telling them every time they mention something paranormal, they should check that old wooden door in the basement and that long latch that consistently seems to reverse what we do to it. Typically, the door isn't completely wide open. It can be cracked or just a few feet, but it's never all the way. We go down there purely to check the status of the door latch, see the door open, close it, and leave. The most recent times the door's been opened, it's been more and more. As I said, it normally is just a few inches to a foot, but over the past couple weeks, it's been a lot more. It's been a lot more. The first week I checked, it was about 5 inches open. I closed it, latched it, and left. The second week it was about a foot. Still nothing too abnormal. I closed it, latched it, and left. The third week, however, it was about halfway open. This was unusual, but I didn't pay too much mind because the door opening is weird in itself. Who cares about the distance? I closed it, latched it, and left. The fourth and fifth weeks, though, they were off. The door was open to the wall both times. I got chills seeing it both times. There were no footprints in the dirt-covered floor. I didn't see any evidence of someone coming down here. It was the same damp, cold room I was used to, but the door was fully open. Both times, I closed it, latched it, and left. Every time I'd speak to someone about it, they'd ask me questions. All I could muster in response was, my basement door can't seem to stay closed. The sixth time I checked the door, it wasn't open, and it was still latched. I walked up to it to make sure, and yes, my eyes were correct. I started to walk away. I hit the third step up, and I heard something. A latch. The latch. My head whipped under the short ceiling and the banister my hand was sweatily gripping onto. The latch was undone. My eyes stayed locked onto the latch until I saw a crack forming in between the doorway and the door itself, accompanied by a slow, slight, drawn-out creak of the door opening in front of my very own eyes. Goosebumps covered my arms and back. Every hair on my body stood on end as I witnessed what was behind the still opening door. The door finished opening while I was still frozen on the steps. Instead of seeing the usual 3 concrete steps going up toward the metal doors, I was faced with a small landing and a long staircase going down. It was steep and lit by dim lanterns placed every 60 feet or so. Part of me wanted to continue walking up and slam the door behind me, but the other part knew I had to look at the passage a little closer. My hand unstuck from the railing, and I ducked under the ceiling support beams and ducks to creep toward the doorway. My goosebumps remained, and my hair stood still. I felt itchy and uneasy. I waddled closer and closer until I reached the landing. I felt my blood run cold. This staircase was much farther down here than where I could see from before. What is down there? I quietly thought out loud to myself. My brain was riddled with questions. My body was filled with fear. The staircase was so dark, empty, unbelievably clean. I reached out and touched the walls. They were porous like limestone. The entire way down was the same color and poorly lit. I stepped onto the landing, and my heart filled with dread. I shouldn't go down, I pathetically attempted to convince myself. I took a step, followed by another and another. I continued walking down these stairs. It felt like the air around me was getting warmer. I kept taking steps closer to what I'd hoped was the end. I looked up behind me and could no longer see where I'd started, only the dark steps on both the ceiling and floor. I let out an exasperated sigh and continued walking. It couldn't have been less than 10 minutes until I thought I saw something at the bottom. The floor. I definitely saw a floor. I hurried down, being cautious as there was no railing for me to grab onto. The floor was getting closer, slightly brighter than the stones surrounding me in the stairwell. I saw some more light as I got closer until eventually I hit the bottom. There was something on the third to last step. I tripped and tumbled onto the floor. I had hurt my hand from the fall, but it was nothing serious. When I stood, I peered around the new room I landed in and soon noticed that it wasn't a new room at all. This was my basement, an exact replica of my basement, but it felt different. I couldn't place the difference immediately, but I quickly realized there was no staircase out, only the one I'd just come down. There was a vent close to the ground that I didn't recognize as well. I crouched and waddled towards it. It was thin, grated metal. I gazed through the small squares and attempted to pull on it, but it wouldn't budge. I backed away. While wandering around the rest of the room, I noticed a few more minor changes in what I knew as my basement. Some more odd vents, some spots that dipped down or the ceiling was higher. Until I heard it. There was breathing. I couldn't hear it over my own, but in the brief gaps of my inhales and exhales, I heard another person breathing. I looked around for the source, but couldn't locate it. My brain told me to retrace my steps, so that's what I did. I slowly paced back to each abnormality, each vent, until I reached the first vent I saw. It was louder. I felt it hit the peach fuzz hairs on my face. It sped up, got more breathy, turned into more of a growl. I backed up and started crawling back to the stairs that I came from, my hands getting all cut up on the ground. The growl turned into a whine, the whine into a deep rumble. When I finally reached the stairs and started crawling up them, the grate on the wall creaked into a loud crash, following by scurrying. Something just came out of that vent. And not even looking back, my crawl turned into a full-fledged sprint. I was not staying in this version of my basement. That thing was coming, and I didn't care whether I heard it or not. All I knew was I was getting out of this stairwell faster than I went in it. I kept sprinting. Faster, faster, faster. Fast. Okay. Now I'm slowing down. My legs were giving out. My head started to hurt. It wasn't slowing with me. It was catching up. But I could see the top now. Exhilaration took over. Adrenaline rushed through each and every vein in my body. Thankfully, I sped up. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I reached the top landing. That thing reached it not long after I did. Seconds after, actually. I slammed the door in its face and was met with pounding and cracking. It was going to get out, and I wouldn't be here for it. I ran up the second staircase out of the basement and into my house. Nobody was home. Once I slammed the entry door, I heard the thing in the basement break the wooden one. I hurried outside. And once I made it out of the house, I walked to the middle of my front yard to catch my breath. As I was looking back at my home, I saw it staring at me through the stained glass window of the front door. Its brown eyes, dark hair, pale skin. My heart sank as my eyes widened. Was I looking at me? As a wife, I often engaged in casual conversations with my friends who were also wives about the ups and downs of married life. It wasn't solely positive or negative. Every aspect had its own blend of good and bad. However, sharing the less favorable aspects of marriage with my fellow wives helped maintain the strength of my own marriage while relieving stress from my mind. At one point, I confided in my best friend Amelia about my husband Randy. Over the course of our 4-year marriage, he had undergone significant positive changes, for which I should have been grateful. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. What? Your husband has become more romantic, sweeter, more attentive, and you suspect him because of that? Many women would desire such qualities in their husbands, in case you didn't notice. Amelia responded with a hint of humor in her voice. Or could it be that you suspect his change in behavior is because he's hiding something, like an affair? She whispered to me. No. I mean, I did suspect that at one point, but there was no signs of anything like that, I replied, sipping my coffee. It's not what I meant. I mean, physically, he looks the same down to the smallest details. The birthmark, the scars from his college days, even the way he spoke. But deep down, I felt like he wasn't the man I married 5 years ago, I explained. How so? Amelia asked. I don't know, Ames. I just feel it. When did you start feeling this way? She inquired again. I paused for a moment, gazing at the ceiling of my house, trying to recollect my memories. About 3 years ago, I responded. It was true. 3 years ago, I sensed something different about him. He seemed slightly uncomfortable, as if he wasn't accustomed to certain things he used to be experienced with. However, as time went by, things appeared to return to normal. Nothing else struck me as peculiar, aside from the occasional uneasy feeling. I did try to confront him about his apparent change, which resulted in a heated argument. However, none of our arguments provided evidence to support my suspicions. Perhaps I was overreacting, but I asked him about our shared moments, even the smallest details that only we knew. Surprisingly, he answered everything flawlessly. Despite his successful efforts to prove himself, I still felt uneasy. With each passing day, my uneasiness grew stronger, fueling my thoughts. Apart from my uneasy gut feeling, he transformed into an ideal spouse rather than the opposite. You could call me ungrateful or anything, but as much as I wished for a perfect partner, I have come this far to realize that there is no such thing as a perfect partner. And then, one fateful day, I received the answer I dreaded. It was early morning when my husband left for the office, and I bid him farewell with a kiss at the door. A few hours later, there was an abrupt knock on my door, followed by police officers presenting a search warrant for my house. What? What is this about? I haven't done anything, I exclaimed frantically. We're looking for your husband, the detective informed me. But he's still at the office, I responded, my heart racing at the detective's unsettling reply. No, not that one, the detective clarified. Not that one? What is that supposed to mean? They instructed me to sit and wait on the couch while they combed through the house. Horror struck me when I witnessed some of the officers emerging from the basement, carrying a body bag in their hands. Wait, what? A body bag? Is there a dead body in the house? Who is that? I stammered in panic and horror. We have confirmed it. It's your husband, the detective announced. I was shocked. It felt like my heart had stopped for a brief moment. No, that can't be. He's still at the office. I saw it with my own eyes when he left the house. I got into his car this morning. I pleaded once again with the detective. The detective beckoned me closer. He was well preserved due to mummification. So it's safe for you to see and verify, the detective explained as he unzipped the body bag, revealing the lifeless face of Randy, my husband. Have you ever felt that something was off about your husband lately? The detective asked me when I finally managed to gather myself. Well, to be honest, yes. But whenever I confronted him with personal questions, he always had the right answers, I explained. He was an expert. It seems he diligently followed your every move before deciding to assume your husband's identity. He studied your husband's scars, learned to mimic his speech and gait, everything. This man is a deranged stalker. It's nearly impossible to distinguish the two apart, except for your intuition, the detective revealed. I sank back onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. I had no idea how to react or what steps to take next. I wonder how long he's been impersonating my husband, I mumbled. Based on our medical examiner's findings in our investigation, we can roughly estimate the duration, the detective informed me, pausing for a moment. I'm sorry, ma'am, but did you perhaps live with your husband before you got married? He asked politely, sitting next to me on the couch. No, I replied. I moved in with him after we got married. Regarding the questions you asked during your confrontation, when did the events related to those questions occur? The detective inquired. I stared at the detective, consumed by disappointment and anger at myself. I was certain my face turned crimson with embarrassment. Dear God, I murmured as I forcefully slapped my own face with both hands. Ma'am, the detective tried to console me. 3 years, I responded. It all started 3 years ago at those events. No wonder. Suddenly, the detective reached into his pocket and pulled out a vibrating cell phone. Yes, Detective Roberts speaking, he answered the call. After listening for a moment, he ended the call with disappointment, evident in his face and voice. Great, he muttered. What is it? I asked. The other half of my team was rushing to your husband's office at the same time I rushed here. We were attempting to apprehend him, he explained. My team just reported that he isn't in the office. It appears we were too late, he continued. Only God knows where he'll be and who he'll transform into next. I never thought I'd be glad to leave her behind. That's what I told myself when I left the cabin. I told myself I needed to escape. I was suffocating in that house. The dust, the silence, the shadow of the plantation hanging over everything. My grandmother, who raised me with such fierce love, could never understand why I needed to go. But she always told me to follow my path, even if it meant leaving her behind. "You have to go, Reed. You've got a future," she would say, every time I thought about saying. Every time I thought about staying. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could make a new life for myself at college. I thought the distance would help me forget the weight of the cabin, the way the past seemed to linger there, never quite gone. But now, sitting on this train, the envelope in my hands, it feels like I've never left at all. She's gone. The lawyer, or whatever he was, he came to me in the city a week ago. A cold man with his gray suit and his dull, monotone voice. He said my grandmother had passed. That she'd left everything to me. Everything. The plantation, the house, the acres of land she kept alive with memories and little else. All of it was mine now. There was a part of me that wanted to tell him no, that I wanted nothing to do with it. But I couldn't, because I knew what she wanted. She always wanted me to take care of it, to keep the legacy alive, even if it was a broken thing. The sugar mill had been dead for years. The fields were overgrown. The house was falling apart. But it was still ours. And now, it was mine. Mine. The train rattles on, and I open the leather-bound ledger the attorney handed me. It smells like dust and old paper, the kind of smell I remember from when I was a kid and would sit in her lap listening to her stories. Her handwriting is neat, delicate in a way that doesn't match the strength I remember in her voice. She used to talk about the plantation, about the history buried in the land, like it was some living thing. She never talked about leaving it behind, never spoke of selling it. It was always ours, no matter how rundown it became. I flipped through the pages, her notes, her calculations. And then, there it is. The chest is buried under the old oak. 88 silver coins. If the time comes, it will be yours to find. I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. My heart starts to race, and I feel the tightness in my chest, the one I've carried with me since I left that place behind. A treasure? Buried on the property? I never knew. I don't know why she never mentioned it. Maybe that was her way of testing me. Maybe she knew that someday I'd need a reason to go back. 88 silver coins. I can't imagine how much they could be worth. If I found them, I could sell the plantation, the whole thing. I could finally escape, pay off my student loans, maybe even move far away, away from the house, away from the ghosts that linger in the corners of my mind. But it's wrong, isn't it? My grandmother, the woman who raised me, who taught me everything about loyalty and family, wouldn't have wanted me to think like this. She would have wanted me to take care of it, to restore it to what it once was. She never gave up on the land, even when it seemed impossible. She poured everything into it. I let the ledger fall open to the next page, my fingers trembling. I've kept the farm alive with hope, Reed. But it's time for you to decide what you want. Don't carry the weight of this place on your shoulders forever. Her words. But it's not enough. I can't help but feel like I'm failing her by thinking about selling it, by thinking about walking away from the one thing that kept her alive for so many years. But I know deep down that I'm going to do it. I'm going to find that I'm going to do it. I'm going to find those coins. I'm going to sell the plantation. I'll bury the past for good. And still, I can't shake the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, my grandmother knew all along that I'd be the one to end it. The one to let it go. The train clatters along the tracks, and the sky outside turns pale, as if it's understanding my dilemma. I stare out the window, fighting the guilt creeping up on me. It's wrong. But I have to do it. I have to. I can't live like this anymore. I can't live with her ghosts. When I arrive in Morrow's Hall, it hasn't changed. The town looks and smells exactly the way it did when I left. The sun hides behind a haze of sickly yellow clouds, and the cicadas sing in the stale, wet heat. I feel suffocated and watched. There's no reason to linger in town. After the train leaves, I walk across the tracks towards the old road that leads to the plantation. The road is overgrown, unpaved, and with a strip of grass running down its middle, as wagon ruts become tire tracks, and eventually, it was all just a path. I brought my backpack with me because I expect to make this quick. I'll visit the plantation, unlock her cabin, and pack her things. I know a grocery deliverer found her when she was on the porch. They say she was sitting in her chair there, just staring. Somehow, I still expected her to be there. I wasn't mourning her yet. I hadn't really realized what it meant that she was gone. When I got there, a strangeness was waiting for me. It was early evening, and there were no lights on in that cabin. It suddenly hit me that I was alone, without her. I'd never see her again. Somehow, the pain of losing her had waited. I sank to my knees and started to cry. When I unlocked the door and went in, I realized the task before me was far greater than I had allowed myself to realize. Packing all her things, selling the plantation, digging up a treasure. It wasn't going to be a quick visit, and it wasn't going to be easy. I make some tea, feeling how she must have felt, like the ghosts are all I have left. Your great-great-great-grandfather was a slave. When he was freed, he built this place. This plantation is our family's legacy, my grandmother had told me. There's this fear in me of knowing too much about the past. She knew, and it haunted her. The first night at home is always the worst. That's how it should be, anyway. Perhaps the past should just stay buried. Perhaps it has no place in our lives. I could hear how the past walked around, searching for itself. It was out there, in the night. I listen, and it stops and knows I listen. I look, peering into the creaking darkness, and it is looking back at me. I can feel it, angry with me, judging me. My nightmares are a cold sweat, and I wake up and it's still dark. Still night. Shouldn't it be morning? I light a candle, humming to myself to try and alleviate the vague sense of dread. Why is the front door open? It's dark, and I feel a chill. I look and see that someone is there. Someone is standing in the cabin, just a dark figure, hunched and menacing, holding a pearl-handled cane. Who is there? I want to say the words. I want to ask them who they are. I want to speak, but there's a fear growing inside me. It starts out like a dream, as though nothing is happening at all, and then the fear rises, growing ever more solid and threatening. I'm gripped in silent terror, my trembling hand holding the only light, the flickering candle. I see that it isn't a someone at all. It is a something. Something from the bayou. Something dripping and moving towards me. Why is it here? My eyes shut and open, and it's closer, slowly getting closer, and I'm trapped, cornered in my bed. It has eyes, pure white glowing orbs beneath a black veil. It's staring at me, approaching me, and it uses the cane and coming ever nearer. If I didn't wake up, it would have stood over me where I slept, its silent form and that cane. I sensed it was a weapon, and it would break every bone in my body if it got close enough. Panic floods me, and I drop the candle, turning to run for the window in the back. Now it's making a sound like a kind of sigh, a kind of moan. It makes a sound like it's almost a voice, almost like a wind. It's a gasp, a frustrated, empty noise, like air being sucked into the void of a coffin. This thing, it's from the grave. It is from the grave. And as I open a window, the smell betrays this fact. Something unliving that walks again. When I'm outside, I turn and look, my panic subsiding after I escape. I cannot believe what I've met. I see it's like a woman staring at me from the window. She's vengeful and awake, staring pitiless at me. I'm out. I'm gone, I say to her. I take off running towards the road. Something catches my foot and I am falling. I don't hit the ground. I'm falling for too long. When I open my eyes, I'm in a ditch. I've hit my head on a pile of branches. I feel a kind of numbness in my cheek and an ache that feels like it stopped bleeding hours ago. I pull a piece of wood out from my face, with relief and agony intermingled. I discard the bloody splinter and climb out of the ditch, my clothes torn and muddy. The sun has risen, and I think I'm safe now. I see her there, in the daylight, a dark figure, searching along the road, her back to me. I leave the ditch and return to the cabin, locking the door, shutting the window. I see her out there. She knows where I am now. She saw me. I have to get out of here. I know she'll kill me, beat me to death with her cane. Whatever she is, she moves slowly but relentlessly. I'm worried the lock on the door won't stop her. No, that or I'm trapped inside with her out there. The ledger is my only friend. There are photographs in here of my ancestors. On instinct, I search among them for an answer, and I'm rewarded with one. Sometimes, it's better not to know. What are you? I stare at the photo. She looks blind, but she can still see me anyway. I have made her angry. I go to my grandmother's desk and begin to search among her papers for any clue. That's all I can do. That thing out there, she's circling the cabin. Could I outrun her? Somehow I don't think it's possible. Wherever I go, the window, the door, she's always on the other side. Sometimes she moves so slowly, of course I could outrun her, and then she just appears in front of me. No, there's no escape if I made a break for it. With the door locked, she doesn't seem to be able to come inside. My research finds me in the pages of an old diary. I find out who Sugarcane was, her strange name, her cane, and her blindness, except she could see things in people. 100 silver dollars for the land and house, I read. Dollars? I read how my family had cheated her. She was allowed to live in the very cabin I was hiding in, while we kept the house and the sugar mill and the land. The money, or most of it, was still buried somewhere. "Well, let me make it right," I said through the door. I felt her rage, awakened somehow by my own greed to sell the place and take the money. I'll leave it all to you. I'll just go back to school. Just let me bury my grandmother." I opened the door slowly, flinching, worried she would end me anyway. One blow from her cane and I fear my bones would shatter just like in my nightmares. I watched her go. She sat beneath the old tree between the cabin and the dilapidated house I was never allowed to play in as a child. I stared, my eyes fixed on her. But it was as though she were part of the ground, the tree, blending in with the darkness of the shade. And then I couldn't see her. I was still looking where she had gone, but it was like she was always there, just part of the place. I took my backpack with me, leaving everything as it was. My grandmother was to be buried in the cemetery in Morrow's Hall. I left the plantation behind, never to look back. I'll pay my debts on my own, make my own way in this world. The ghosts can keep what belongs to them. When I put my grandmother to rest, I tell her I have made things right. And that is how it will remain. There once was a man on Brier Lane. Nobody knew who he was. He was just another homeless bum to most, an ugly blemish on an otherwise picture-perfect suburban neighborhood. Everyone collectively seemed to avert their gaze whenever they found themselves walking down Brier Lane. They would stick to the opposite sidewalk and hastily trot along their way like he wasn't there. I was guilty of doing the same for many years. As a child, I was taught that it was rude to stare, but every time I turned a corner to Brier Lane, I would steal glimpses at the man. He was a disheveled, rugged man who looked to be in his 50s. He was kept warm by his unkempt graying beard, a thick, weathered wool jacket, a frayed beanie, and cargo pants with a number of small holes torn into them. His eyes never met mine, but I noticed his piercing blue eyes hidden behind an exhausted demeanor. He looked like any other homeless man, except for the eye patch he had, which I found rather amusing when I was younger. He must have been a pirate resting after a long voyage at sea, I thought. I always made sure to look away and stare straight whenever I got close, fearing he would notice my eyes linger on him for a split moment. I didn't want to initiate any interaction of any sort with the man. Not that he had done anything wrong. He never begged for spare change or bothered anyone asking for help. He only ever just sat on the concrete sidewalk and leaned against the brick wall. I never saw him eat or drink or do much of anything. He sat in silence, alone, every day, on Brier Lane. I'm not sure when the man on Brier Lane first piqued my curiosity. He was mysterious, to say the least, and that had a certain allure. It wasn't a full-on obsession, but I would catch myself wondering in the back of my mind about the life the man led. Not how he ended up on the streets, but the life experience he had that molded him into this cold, distant man. The betrayals, the losses, and the constant struggle for survival. What must have shaped him into someone so disconnected, wallowing alone in his small corner of the world, clinging on to the remaining warmth that was left within after a lifetime of hardship? What was it that brought him to that particular street, and why was it that he chose to rest? What made him the man on Brier Lane? The first time I spoke to the man on Brier Lane was when I was 14. I stopped by a convenience store on my way home from school with a few friends. It was our usual after-school hangout joint. We bought the usual snacks our parents warned us to go easy on and tried convincing each other to spend our allowances gambling on Pokemon booster packs. I would have given in to the peer pressure, but a pestering voice, perhaps the angel on my shoulder, reminded me of the man on Brier Lane. I ended up leaving the convenience store with a bag of chips, a bottle of water, and one of those questionable hot dogs wrapped in tinfoil. Brier Lane was along my way home, so I didn't need to take a detour. Before I even made the corner, I could already visualize the man sitting, slumped against the wall as he always was. I walked down Brier Lane, and for the first time, I made my way down his side of the road. I remember it was rather disorienting, like sleeping on a different side of the bed. It just seemed wrong to see things from a new perspective. As I drew near, I could feel my heart beating rather quickly. It was the same kind of nervousness one might feel when introducing themselves to a stranger. I assumed our eyes would meet as soon as he noticed I was headed towards him, yet his eyes remained fixed on the opposite side of the lane. I stopped in front of him, standing right in front of his field of view. Still, he refused to acknowledge my existence. I didn't think it was rude of him at the time, just odd. His sunken eyes red of exhaustion and defeat. I bent down slightly and held out the bottled water and tinfoil-wrapped hot dog. I had gotten a bag of chips for myself, but at that moment it didn't feel right to withhold it from him, and so I offered it to him as well. For the first time, the man slightly tilted his head upwards so that his eyes met mine. Slowly, he lifted his right hand from out of his jacket pocket. He was missing his thumb, his middle, and pinky finger. On the back of his palm was a large, dark patch of skin, either a birthmark or some disgusting stain. With speed and strength greater than I thought he was capable of, he swatted the items I offered away, knocking them onto the ground. Startled, I flinched and stumbled back, failing to find my footing. I landed hard on the concrete floor, now leveled with the man on the ground. He glared at me with white-hot intensity in his eyes. He began to raise his left arm, taking his hand out of his jacket pocket. I thought he was reaching to grab me, but there was nothing but a stump where his hand should have been. My instincts finally kicked in, and without wasting a second, I scrambled onto my feet, fleeing from the man. I didn't hear any footsteps in pursuit. I reached the end of the lane and finally risked turning around to see the man, still sitting exactly where he was, his eyes locked on me. I ran the rest of the way home. For the next few years, I took any detours I needed to, however inconvenient, just to avoid the man on Brier Lane. The next time I would encounter the man on Brier Lane would be when I was 18, coming back home after studying at my university abroad. I had all but forgotten about the scare I experienced with the man, forgotten that I made a vow to never walk down Brier Lane. It was evening, and the sun sat gently upon the horizon, casting an orange to purple gradient across the sky. I remember it was rather beautiful and mesmerizing. The intense feeling of nostalgia struck as details of my walk home as a child bombarded me. Details such as a stop sign that was just slightly bent, left making it seem like a sheepish suggestion. Then a familiar crack in the concrete I always thought resembled a dog's face. I came across a rather depressing sight of the same convenience store I used to frequent in my youth, now closed down and abandoned. Vines and weeds had begun overtaking the structure, and then finally, I turned the corner onto Brier Lane. It wasn't until I saw him that the memory of our last encounter surfaced again. I almost couldn't believe it, but there he was, visibly older and more worn down, but still sat in the same position and in the same spot. I almost considered taking a detour to avoid him. At that moment, I felt like the scared child I was all those years ago. However, the rational part of me assured myself that I had nothing to fear. He was merely a man down on his luck. It was pity I should have felt, so I proceeded down Brier Lane, and as usual, he didn't acknowledge my presence. I didn't plan on it, but I had an unopened bottle of water in my bag. I fished it out as I was walking, deciding to extend my kindness once again and offer it to the man. As I drew near, I noticed that he seemed smaller than I had remembered. I thought perhaps he had shrunk with age. It wasn't until I stood before him I noticed the loose, hanging sleeve swaying in the wind. Due to the absence of his left arm, I left him the bottle of water placed above a $20 bill. His gaze never waned, as if I was invisible to him. I told him to take care of himself and left. That evening stuck with me for a while. I told him to take care of himself and left. That evening stuck with me for a while. I kept wondering what had happened to the man on Brier Lane. For the next few years, I saw the man on Brier Lane in intermittences of 3 or 4 months. Whenever I would visit my family, I'd make sure to stop and check in on the man. I'd bring him something to eat and drink and always left him a $20 bill, although I wasn't sure if he ever took it. Each time I did, I grew gradually more concerned. It would start small, maybe another missing finger or a few missing teeth. Other times, I'd come back to see him missing a foot or an ear. Sometimes it's more alarming, like when they took his entire right leg, his nose, and finally his other eye. There were never any remnants of blood being spilt on Brier Lane. The man never cried for help. He just sat in contempt, slowly stripped of his flesh and being. The sleeves of his clothes hung slack, an empty reminder of what he once was. Robbed of his sense of sound, smell, and now sight, I shudder to imagine what he was left with. Alone was the man on Brier Lane, accompanied only by the pain and longing for what was lost. Accompanied only by the pain and longing for what was lost. The sight of him was hard to ignore now. People could no longer bear to simply walk past him. Some would steal passing glances, unable to look away at the horror, as if he was a circus freak show attraction. Most don't even dare to walk through Brier Lane anymore, especially not at night when a lone street light illuminates the living corpse for all to see. Occasionally, some children on a dare would sprint down the street, fueled by the fear of the urban legend of the ghoul of Brier Lane. A decade had passed since the first time I spoke to the man. I think I'm the only one who still sees him. On several occasions, I've alerted the police and called an ambulance. They always assured me that they were on their way. I never heard the sirens, nor saw the flashing blue and red lights. I never did stop trying to get him help. I just wish I did more for him before they took too much, before they fully dismantled the man on Brier Lane. A week ago was the last time I or anybody ever saw the man on Brier Lane. What I saw prompted me to tell this story. It has been nearly 15 years since I first spoke to the man. I am now in my late 20s. The man on Brier Lane, now reduced to nothing but a torso with a head attached. Stumps remained where he once had arms and legs. His face now resembled a skull, with empty sockets and a smooth, featureless hole where his nose once was. It's gotten so bad, I find myself unable to bear the sight of what he has become. Practically a corpse, just rotting on the street, waiting for death to finally take him. Perhaps it wasn't death, but something arrived to collect. So I was out late past midnight, trying to find a secluded spot to smoke. The nosy neighbors next door had complained about the smell, so I wandered through the neighborhood in the dead of night when the idea struck me. A place where all but one avoided. I didn't plan on actually going to Brier Lane, but just close enough so that the smell wouldn't linger at a place people frequented. Yet, this sickening obsession I've had since I was a child beckoned me, and soon I found myself at Brier Lane. Something immediately felt off. Brier Lane had become so familiar to me, I instantly knew something didn't belong. I saw the man, sitting slump beneath the spotlight of the street lamp as usual. Something just outside of the light seemed to shift in the shadows. It was a figure standing just next to the man. It was uncanny watching anyone else interact with the man on Brier Lane, especially with the grotesque state he was in. I always suspected there was someone looking out for him, feeding him and keeping him alive, although I'm not sure I would call it mercy. I kept quiet and out of view as I watched the figure. All I could make out was the dark silhouette. I'm not exactly sure why, but I felt the need to make myself scarce, as if I knew instinctively that I was intruding on something I should not have seen. I watched as the silhouette knelt down so that he was level with the man. The silhouette seemed to be speaking to the man, but I was too far to discern their conversation. I kept watching intently, holding my breath as if I would somehow improve my hearing. Suddenly, the man, as if reacting to the silhouette's words, began to violently flail. He wasn't capable of much motion, but with the mobility he had, he pushed himself onto his stomach and began to worm away from the silhouette. For the first time, I heard a sound escape the man's mouth. It was a terrible wail, a mixture of suppressed pain, anguish, and panic. It sounded inhuman, as he had all his teeth pulled and tongue severed. It was hard to watch him try desperately to flee from the figure and failing to make much progress. I still wonder if I should have intervened at that moment. I just couldn't bring myself to. I felt paralyzed by the situation and did nothing but watch as the events unfolded in front of me. A man stripped of everything with nothing left to be taken, save for his life. I could not fathom what horror could possibly frighten a man like that. That was until the figure stood back up and stepped into the spotlight, looming over the man like it was wounded prey. It was just a man. He looked to be in his 60s. He had a clean-shaven beard and piercing blue eyes. On this cold night, he was kept warm by a clean white suit under his long, dark overcoat. He wore a devious smile as he watched the man on Brier Lane wriggle and writhe. An itch perked at the back of my mind as the man's face struck of familiarity. It was a face I hadn't seen for some time, but my memory told me I had seen often before. I wrestled with the conclusion I was forced to draw, but as much as I tried to deny it, the man in the coat had the face of the man on Brier Lane. Cleaned up, with a confident aura, and an expensive attire, made it difficult to recognize him. But I did. The man in the coat simply bent down and reached outwards with his right hand, resting it on the struggling man's shoulder. The dark patch birthmark on the back of his hand erased any doubts I had left. As I strained my eyes to make out the details, I think I might have seen stitches on his skin. I continued to watch as he lifted the man off the ground with ease, cradling him like one would a child. As he held the man's struggles and screams did not cease. Like a fish out of water, the man flailed in his arms, trying hopelessly to escape his grasp. He held onto the man firmly but effortlessly. As he turned to walk down the street away from me, he stopped in his tracks. I felt my heart rise up to my throat. The fear of him having noticed me made my legs feel weak under my weight. He turned his head towards me with a faint smile drawn across his face. He had the presence of a special kind of person that you only meet a handful of times in your life, like he understood and cared. Yet this facade of his only made me feel greater unease. The uncanny sight of a smiling man holding a dismembered corpse was seared into my nightmares. Casually, while balancing the body on one arm, he reached his free hand into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper which he dropped. Like a leaf in the wind, it gently glided onto the pavement, resting perfectly where the man used to sit. With that, the two of them disappeared into the darkness of the night. The man's cries never ceased as they went, but it slowly died down to a whimper, and soon I was left alone in silence. I wasn't sure how long it took me to work up courage to finally move. I stumbled my way down Brier Lane as my legs felt like socks stuffed with pebbles. Slowly, I moved towards the streetlight to retrieve the paper left behind. It was all that remained of the man on Brier Lane. Now, as I write this, I hold on to the tangible remnant to assure myself that I hadn't imagined what I saw. It is a $20 bill with a note attached by a paperclip. Scrawled onto the note in red ink are the words, "Remember, there once was a man here on Brier Lane." Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. A quick shout out to my patrons, Melissa Perez, Lawrence Wallen, Eric Cifuentes, Jesse Hartley, Icy Narrates, Alonzo, Cupcake Hips, William Hartley, Rinku Star, Austin My Love, Mr. Sankofa, Seven Cities Journalist, and Ellie Hutmeyer. As usual, guys, I put a link to charity in the description. I'm going to keep it on the LA fires for a hot minute, but I will include other charities a little bit after. I understand that the fires are now no longer big news, but I would still like for the victims of the fires to receive help rebuilding their lives. And as I have been saying, even if that includes you unsubscribing from my Patreon for a while just so that you have something to donate to them, I highly encourage that and I will not be offended. And as usual, feel free to reach out to me on any social media. Let me know how I can be praying for you, and I am more than happy to do that for you. God bless you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.